All right, let's dive in. We are going to go all over the place. So first place I want to go is Jacksonville. Florida, 44. Georgia, 28. Where would you start? I was wondering that as I was driving in here today. Where would you start if you were talking about this? Well, normally I like to go down the winner's route first, but I'm going to talk about Kirby and Georgia's future here. I'm going to definitely talk about the quarterback situation there. I'm going to talk about everything Florida. There was a false padlock stat in this game. Padlock stats, we have our own language here on Late Kick, and padlock stats, as I've explained many times, are stats where if I showed them to you Friday, you'd know everything you needed to know about the outcome of the game. Well, what a lot of you have taken to doing is you've taken to emailing me or DMing me on Twitter after games saying, hey, look, a padlock stat. But see, some padlock stats aren't really padlock stats. Some of them are false. Let me give you an example of what a false padlock stat is. What if I told you on Friday or even Saturday morning, you're sitting there having breakfast with your kids, what if I were to tell you today, for your Georgia Bulldogs, you are going to outrush Florida by 68 yards, you're going to hold Kyle Pitts to 2 catches, and you're going to grab a 14-0 lead? How confident would you have been? How much money? How much of your savings account would you have dipped into to dump money on the University of Georgia plus whatever? Just take them on the money line. That's what happened yesterday, and yet, here's the bomb that got dropped on you. Even with all that being the case, you still trailed by 17 at the half. Yes, you heard that right if you missed the first half of this game. Georgia both grabbed a 14-0 lead and trailed by 17 at the half. Our best bet last week was Florida plus 4.5. We felt the wrong team was favored. I told you that all week. We gave you our reasoning. We don't need to look back on that. However, some of you started to have doubts. No sooner had I settled in across the walkway here in the 24/7 Sports office than Georgia was up 14-0, and I looked and I saw the phone, saw the iJosh going crazy, Twitter notifications all over the place, and I looked in my DMs, and a lot of you were daring to question our bet of Florida plus 4.5. And none of you wanted to out yourselves afterwards. I'm not going to out you, but you know who you are. So Florida comes through with flying colors. I had a hard time painting a path for Georgia last week. Believe me, it's not normally in my best interest to make one of our best bets a bet that goes against one of our biggest audiences, and Georgia's one of our biggest audiences. But I couldn't find a way for him, and especially when I knew Jordan Davis probably wasn't going to play for him. And listen, I thought Lewis Cine was going to be out. He started, ended up getting knocked out of the game, but that plus having a decided advantage at quarterback for Florida and knowing that they're peaking at the right time. If you've watched Florida this year, they've been getting better, especially coming out of that little 2 or 3 week pause. They've been getting better. Georgia banged up, limited offense for Georgia. There was this talking point, and I didn't know it was a big deal until later in the week because, as I've told you, I don't watch other shows. I just don't listen to other shows. I'll tell you exactly what I listen to. I listen to Barton and Bud stuff, and they do that in-house here. I listen to theirs, very informed. It's a lot of deep dive stuff. It's the kind of content that I prefer. And I'll listen to the guys who do the Cover 3 podcast. I'll listen to that sometimes, especially I'll listen to reaction type stuff. But otherwise, I don't watch the studio shows. So a lot of times you guys are hearing stuff all week that I don't know you're hearing. So I was doing radio in Atlanta Saturday morning with Hudson Mason, and he throws a stat at me, and I heard Rusty say it earlier in the week too about the rushing numbers and how decided an advantage is in this particular series for the team that has more rushing yards. And I picked up on the idea that this must be a major talking point out there in the kind of college football ecosystem about this game. I couldn't have cared less about it. And I told Hudson Mason that. I told Rusty that. I told everyone that. I mean, maybe someone outrushes someone and wins in this game, but I really don't think that'll be the key factor. It didn't mean anything. Georgia's rushing totals yesterday, 29 runs, 165 yards. They averaged 5.7 a carry. Those are good numbers. Florida was 37 for 97, 2.6 per carry. Did it matter? Nope. Didn't matter. It didn't matter for them about as much as it didn't matter for LSU at times last year when, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and those guys, I mean, they'd do enough on the ground, but that's not how they were winning games. That's the only way Georgia was going to win yesterday. That wasn't the way Florida was going to win. So Trask was everything. The run game wasn't everything. Kyle Trask was everything. 30 of 43, 474 through the air. A vast majority of those passing yards came in the first half. 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. How about this number? Talking about depth at the wide receiver position. If I had a couple of questions about Florida earlier in the year, it was how truly deep are they going to be with difference makers at the receiver position? Because you knew the names, but I wanted to know how deep are they going to be consistently. They had 7 wide receivers with at least 39 yards receiving yesterday. That's a heck of a job of development. That's a heck of a job of play calling, distribution, everything. That's a heck of a job right there by Florida. Do you remember back in week 1? Last thing I told Colin before I walked in the room here, the studio. I said, Colin, do you remember in week 1 how much pushback we got? Because here's what I did. I picked Georgia to win the SEC East in the preseason. I told you I'm not convicted in this. It's like 52-48 kind of opinion. And then I watched week 1. I watched what happened at Arkansas with Georgia, and I watched what Florida did to Ole Miss, and I immediately reversed my opinion on the SEC East. And a lot of you said, you can't flip-flop. And I said, of course I can. It's my pick. I can do whatever I want to with it. And then some other folks came forward and said, you're an idiot. Florida plays no defense. Georgia will expose them. I just didn't feel that way. I know Florida's defense left a lot to be desired in week 1. I watched the same game you guys did, but I thought that there were a lot of parallels to be drawn between that Florida team and LSU last year. This is a very tired comparison. I know you're tired of hearing it, and as sure as I say I'm not comparing them to LSU shot for shot last year, you'll still take that away. So that's fine. I can only tell you what I'm telling you. And what I'm telling you is they've improved defensively. Getting Kyrie Campbell back was big, but it's an improved product. That's what great teams do. They improve week over week. You get this idea frozen in your head from the first images you see of a team. I mean, how's that working out for you with Michigan? You know, like, you can't do that. You got to understand the good teams, the ones that are going to end up being good to great, they're going to progress week over week. They're going to be incremental to significant improvement week over week. Well, now, Florida's not going to be a top 5 defensive unit in America at any point this year. They don't have to be because their offense fits that description. But yesterday, I mean, Georgia, they got some yards, they got some points, but Florida's defense is plenty good enough at this point for them to be competitive against pretty much everyone. It's not a finished product. There's a lot of points Georgia left on the field yesterday. But what I felt was when those two teams eventually match up, I'm a lot more likely this year to see the result we saw yesterday than to see a 16-14 rock fight. I just didn't think that was the kind of game we were going to get this year, and we didn't. So, you know, it's a testament to Florida. Like, we get all that, okay? The congratulations, the pats on the back. But Florida's offense bought that defense time this year, and they've come far enough. And it's such a huge outcome for Dan Mullen and Florida, aside from the obvious. You understand what it does this year. It pretty much puts them in Atlanta to face probably Alabama for the SEC championship game. But here's what's happened. We were asking the question in kind of a rhetorical manner Thursday, could there be a balance of power shift in the East? That's still to be determined, by the way, based on what this team does with this win. But there's already been a little shift. I'll give you the little shift. As this game was wrapping up yesterday, I had some Bama folks texting me saying, I'd much rather face Georgia again than face Florida. When's the last time someone said that? When's the last time anyone in the SEC West was looking ahead to a hypothetical matchup in Atlanta and saying, ooh, Florida scares me a lot more than Georgia does? Don't overlook that. That's a big deal. Okay, you want to know about a program growing, you want to know about progression, whatever the dynamics are, whatever you think is isolated to this year. The point is, Florida's got folks more scared in the West now than Georgia does. I don't think that means nothing. It may not mean everything, but that's not something to just toss to the side, because that's something that you look back on 5 years from now and you may say, you know, I knew this stuff was shifting when those folks in Tuscaloosa got a little more worried about the team in Gainesville than the team in Athens, because that has not been the case. As recently as a month ago, for a lot of them, that wasn't the case. Now I want to talk about Kirby, though, and I want to talk about Georgia. I listened to his post-game presser yesterday, and I got to be honest, there are some terrible questions thrown his way. Credit him. He didn't win a game yesterday, but he won his press conference because, my goodness, at any point I thought he was going to backhand the laptop or whatever virtual setting he had, camera in front of him. There were some bad questions thrown his way. But I'll tell you one of the best ones that was thrown his way was from Jake Rowe. It's very clear who understands the game and who doesn't. So Jake's a football guy. He understands the game. I think he's coached it as well. So he throws a question to Kirby Smart, and Kirby can go any direction he wants to with it. And this is after the game, so we've all seen the game play out. And Jake essentially asked him, what kind of offense do you want to have? Because there's this notion out there, and you can correct it if I'm wrong. There's this notion that you just want to possess the ball control, bleed the clock, run it, the 2-to-1 run-to-pass ratio. Like, how do you want to play? And Kirby said, I want to win. That's how I want to play. I want to play in whatever gives us the best chance to win. That's the style. So now I want to go to the accusations being thrown Kirby Smart's way. You know that I'm kind of a pendulum setter here on the show where I'm never as critical, most of the time I'm never as critical as the most critical, but I'm never as praiseworthy as the most praiseworthy. So now the pendulum has swung on Kirby where I'm going to have to pull you guys back to the center a little bit. There's a big gap between can't and hasn't. There's a lot of can't being thrown around about Kirby right now. Can't develop quarterback, can't have a functional offense, can't develop on that side of the ball, period. Maybe it's been lackluster thus far. Maybe the quarterback situation has been mismanaged, or maybe it hasn't. Because the bottom line is, until the end of time, you nor I were not involved in that program when it came down to Justin Fields and Jake Fromm, and no one's changing their mind on that. But I'm just saying there could have been 47 different factors that none of us were privy to that went a long way in making the decision they made. So my point is, whatever happened, I'll play devil's advocate for you. Let's say they did mismanage the quarterback situation. The point he's making now is that's in the past. It's not like after every loss as a head coach, you sit around and you say, darn it, if we had just made a different decision 3 years ago, where would we be? Irrelevant. That's the answer. It doesn't matter because you can't go back and change it. So what he's saying, and his answer yesterday, I encourage you to go back and watch it. His answer to Jake Rowe was, I want to play in a way that we win the game. That's the style. And he said, we could run the plays Alabama runs right now. We could run the plays Florida runs. It's not like the plays are hard to figure out. We don't have the horses to run the plays. And until we have them, it's not like we can just snap our fingers and say, I think we'll run the Alabama offense this week. This is where the Xbox crowd and the football crowd don't really jive. The Xbox crowd sometimes thinks it's as simple as looking, not liking what you see, and you hit the reset button. That's what you can do in Xbox world. You can't do that in the real world. In the real world, you got to lick your wounds, you got to go home, you got to get bandaged up, and you got to go play Missouri, who's off a bye, and you're only favored by 13 points against this week. And then you got to finish your season, and then you got to go get the horses, and you got to bring them into the stable, and then you got to let them run. But you can't let them run if you just got Dobermans. You got to have horses. Horses, many things, Dobermans they are not, and vice versa. And so in the meantime, what do you do? What do you do? Do you sit there and just make the same criticism every week? Because I can tell you right now, the same as I told you about Stetson Bennett early on. That you remember, a lot of you remember, you've been silent now, but a lot of you who were all in our DMs when you said we were hating on Stetson Bennett, we weren't hating on anybody. That kid's not an SEC championship caliber quarterback. It was plain as day back then. It's clear now. It's as clear now as it was back then. I don't know why people tried to convince themselves of otherwise, but the hope back then was you had the JT Daniels ace in the hole. You had it in your back pocket, and at any point, Kirby's pulling it out. He's not close to going in. He's not close to being ready to play. And I wouldn't count on it happening. That's not inside information, mind you. It's not something I've heard in the last 24 hours. It's just context clues. I don't know if you noticed, they had to go to their backup quarterback yesterday. It wasn't JT Daniels. It was Dwan Mathis. Whatever you want to make of that, make of it. But I will say this, when you watch Mathis go in, I think it's pretty obvious why Bennett had been the guy starting. So he being Kirby, has been starting the best option he has. He just doesn't have options. Do you know how helpless that probably feels? You can say it's his fault or not, but that's what they have to play with. So I will say this, though. As much as I may say, hey, give him time, and it's not like there's any hot seat talk with him. We got plenty of hot seat talk coming up, trust me. This goes back to the point I made in 2017 down in Columbus, GA. And I'm making it now, and I've made it every year since then. I kind of made it with LSU last year. This sounds like it's a no-brainer, but I don't really think sometimes folks view it in the proper context. It is so beyond imperative that you win a championship when you have a chance to win a championship. There is never a guarantee you're going back. I don't care if you recruit the #1 class in the country every year until the end of eternity. There are 100 moving pieces in this sport. You can have a loaded roster every year. You get to a championship like they did in 2017. You get into overtime in a championship. You better win it. Because LSU won it last year. They're a disaster right now. It doesn't matter. No one's taking that title away from them. Georgia got that close. Then they got pretty close again the next year. And the talking point coming out of it, trust me, I was in Georgia at the time, so I know good and well what the talking point was. The talking point was, this hurts, this sucks, but that's all right. We'll get ours eventually because we're going to be there every year. I mean, how could we not with this roster? This is how. This season is an example of how. Last year, that's an example of how. So it's only been a little while. Kirby's going to be there a lot longer. They may win 4 of them for all I know. But they hadn't won one yet. And do you feel like you're closer or further away from a national title today than you were in 2017? Think about that, because now the roster is entirely Kirby's. It wasn't back then. That was still part Rick, part Smart. So this game, it works in funny ways. You got to win those titles when you can win them. Now, Florida, we're going to talk about this more this week. Next question is, do they handle their business the rest of the way? And then the question a little ways down the road that we're not going to wait until, we'll probably talk about it this week, how do they compare with Alabama?